The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Virtualization Virtual Group. I keep saying chapter, virtual group for PASS. We're glad you're here. We have David Klee with us, and today is answering your questions. So if you haven't already started putting your questions in, go ahead and do so as we are talking about community news, what's going on with the PASS organization. Of course, the very first thing here is we want to welcome new board members, and they start their seating here very shortly in January, and congratulations to them. We also just got through with PASS Summit. If you've never been to PASS Summit, first of all, let me tell you that the cheapest time to go, or the most economical, let me say it more like that, is going to be when they announce pricing in January. Normally, it's almost half price of what it is versus right up next to when the conference occurs in Seattle. It'll be there again next year. Great networking, great opportunity to learn lots of different stuff. So please do come join us because it is a wonderful time and stuff. And then coming up here today, actually, is you can go on here and register for the developer marathon. There'll be classes going on all day long, so you can register and see if there's anything you might want to take there. All these classes have already occurred. These are happening. There is. We get down to here to where there are some others going on, cross-querying, introduction. But the main thing is with virtual groups, just be aware that there's, and you're already aware because you're on one, that there are literally thousands of hours of free training, and a lot of it's up on YouTube. So you can go and actually look at it at a later date if you're not able to do so. Here's a list of all the virtual chapters. They have pared the list down some. So just FYI, if you don't see what you need, just let us know because we sometimes dive into different areas. And then SQL Saturdays. There's one coming up in Nashville on the 12th if you're anywhere near that. If you've never attended a SQL Saturday, check out SQLSaturday.com. They're announced all the time, and this is a great one-day free event for learning about different topics within the SQL Server platform. So PASS is also looking for new sponsors to help support the organization. If you know of someone that would be willing to support the organization as a whole, reach out to them at sponsorship@pass.org, and you're eligible to get a $100 gift card for the referral. And then also, check out the pass.org website for all the other content and stuff. It's by being here today, of course, you're already a member. And then there's the different ways to contact the organization. So at this point, I'm going to shut my slideshow down. David, do you have anything to share with us today? Should I go ahead and put it over to you?
Nothing to share on the screen. Just wanted to just talk about kind of the state of virtualization and cloud and hybrid right now. It is a fascinating time. I don't know if anybody's been following it, but at this year's VMworld USA, it was a really quiet announcement that coming up, don't know when, but soon, you will be able to take Amazon Relational Database Services, or RDS, and extend it backwards into your on-prem VMware environment. It's a fascinating little announcement. And then this year at reInvent, just a couple of weeks ago, they announced something called Amazon Outposts, which is essentially going to allow Amazon services to go backwards into your data center through the VMware extensions that they've got, which is really interesting. Bottom line, I think that the combination of all of that plus Azure Stack, it is just an exciting time right now. And if you haven't already started learning cloud and hybrid specifically, Now is really the time to get started with it, because if you look at what's coming up, if you look at what's been announced over the last 6 months or so, Azure Stack is awesome. I'm actually retooling my lab here pretty soon so I can get some of that stood up. It's really slick because now you've got your on-prem platform that you've already got this pretty significant investment in. But you've got all the automation that comes with a lot of the cloud play. And to me, that's really powerful because now you can kind of pick and choose, what makes the most difference, what should be placed where. Now there's not a lot of lock-in. You can move stuff around, you can move things to where it needs to be. Tom, what do you think about that?
That sounds pretty awesome, David. It's there is so much going on in that area. The thing that really kind of wonders me is, we were talking a little bit before we moved our stuff back on prem just due to cost. Kind of what are you seeing there? Are you seeing people go out there, brand new applications, or are you seeing really legacy even going up to the cloud?
I'm starting to see kind of the early adopter wave with technology adoption kind of come to a close, and now we're more in the mainstream. I see a lot of folks looking at it from a DR perspective. I see a lot of new applications going straight out there first, and I see a lot of legacy applications. People are starting to look at what it's going to take to get things out there. Now, not every organization is doing this, but I'm starting to see more and more where, it's starting to become mainstream, and the prices have come down enough to where the price on the cloud for these big mission critical systems is not as bad as it used to be. It's still kind of steep, but so is on-prem. So starting to see more and more adoption with it.
Yeah, we're actually doing at our company. We're actually doing the DR also. We're pushing everything up to Azure for the DR in case it went down locally, and then we would be able to go there. What do you think about some of the announcements that we saw at PASS? Persistent memory and stuff like that is like, or you think we'll be able to see that stuff also in the cloud, or is that going to only be on-prem bare metal?
That's a good question. I know the hardware supports it nowadays, but it's really expensive. It's honestly a little prohibitive even on-prem. So I don't know. I want to say we're going to see it in the cloud. I don't know when. I have no details on it. I'd love to see it in the cloud, honestly, because I want to get more and more hands-on with it. And quite frankly, I don't want to spend the money in my own lab. I'd rather basically, rent it here and there on their end just to really get more hands-on with it.
So with persistent memory, kind of, let's kind of batter back and forth. What is it? What, for people that maybe never heard of it, what is it, and what will it offer us from a database technology?
Oh, it's awesome. Essentially, think about this. The fastest SSDs on the planet, so we're talking NVMe-based local PCI Express storage, your storage latency is generally measured in, it's basically microseconds at this point. If you see anything topping 1 millisecond, that's probably a little too high, and you can get flash-based and NVMe-based SANs, and you can see this on those platforms as well, but that's still microseconds. If you go an order of magnitude faster, you're down to nanoseconds. That's the speed of this new technology, and it's essentially RAM, but it persists. Essentially it's there even if you power the machine off. So if the machine were to die right in the middle of an operand, whatever's there on PMEM is going to persist when the machine comes back up. So essentially, you've got memory now at maybe about 1,000 times faster than storage, and it persists. It's awesome. And what Microsoft is going with this is to essentially put the tail of the database transaction log on PMEM. And what they're finding is that they're getting a dramatic performance gain with this. It's one of those for really high performance machines. We're just starting to see people explore it on, in the wild. We've been wanting to get our hands on it for a while, but it's supposed to have some pretty significant performance gains there. The virtualization platforms do support this. So if you do have this kind of technology on-prem, you can actually leverage it and get it to run. You don't need that much. Microsoft Microsoft is saying, from the little bit of reading that I've seen, it's 20, 30 megs worth of PMEM space for the tail log. And essentially that, substantial, basically noticeable, measurable, very evident performance gain. It's pretty cool. So I'm waiting to see, where is this going to go? Because if we can get PMEM now, where's your bottleneck? And if you have this locally, now you've got single points of failure. If you try to put this in a SAN, your interconnects to get there are going to be many times faster than the actual storage, plus the controller to go through. So is it, where is this going to go? But it's fun. It's cool.
Can I have it in my laptop? Yeah. So I need speed in my laptop. I need speed in my laptop, so.
Hey, my next laptop is going to have a 6-core Xeon and 128 gigs of RAM. I don't know about you, but I need speed.
Yeah, I'm going to have to fork out some major bucks for the next laptop, I think. So, well, cool. How are you seeing people with containers? Are you doing anything with containers? And
Yeah.
did you happen to see Bob's presentation on Inside SQL Server with containers?
I missed that session, unfortunately. I really wanted to go see that one. I could not make it. But we are doing a lot with containers. Essentially, the biggest thing that we're doing with containers right now is DevOps. So if I need to have a code release, or if I want to go provision the machine for somebody, I can spin up a SQL server in just a couple of minutes, and I can have this thing pre-built, pre-ready to go, so I can have my databases on there, my objects, everything that you need from a development standpoint, so it's just good to go. I mean, it's awesome. Beats local installations. It beats all kinds of stuff. We're seeing this in the wild, where people are doing this from more of from a development standpoint. DevOps, cross-platform development, because now you can run it on Linux or Mac. It's pretty cool. From a production standpoint, I'm seeing people exploring it. It's one of those, I don't know when people are going to be ready to go there, because I don't see a lot of it right now, but I do know that it's ready. The question is, do you want to deploy it like that? I see it right now more from a development efficiency standpoint, but there's no telling when it's going to be ready for production, but I feel eventually it will be.
Well, with any luck, I'm trying to get Bob Ward to actually present that to the virtualization virtual group here next month in January.
Oh, score.
So I'm trying really hard. I haven't got him signed on yet, but hopefully within the first quarter I'll have him do that. And when that comes out, David, if you got access to recordings, highly recommend you going and looking at it. And like I said, guys, I will be bringing it at some point to the virtualization group, because it was absolutely incredible the way he was working with containers, because he was actually doing it, David, with kind of like the engine was running in the container, but then the databases were like on local storage.
Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, it's a pretty common deployment method.
Yeah,
it makes it portable like that, but then you have to worry about moving the data.
Yeah, you'd have moved data, and he was showing how you could upgrade to the next service pack by just changing your container, or even upgrading to the next version of SQL Server by just changing the container on top. And I was like, whoa,
that's
it's like
cool.
I mean, you didn't even, there wasn't like a whole ton of stuff you had to do like you have to do today to get ready for a change and stuff. So it was really cool.
Nice.
Very, very cool. So guys, go ahead and get your questions in. I don't see any questions yet from any of you. We'll just continue kind of chatting here of things that we've seen and stuff. Are you seeing people upgrade? Have you had any, do you still see a lot of R2 out there, or are we pretty much getting a lot of people are now in maybe 2012 and kind of getting to 16 and 17,
Mm-hmm.
or what are you seeing?
Depends on standard DBA answer. It depends. I see a lot of legacy systems out there. We work on a lot. There are a lot of 2008, 2002. We've even got a handful of 2005 machines out there. The companies that we're working with, they are aggressively trying to upgrade these. It's not like a year ago where people are going, yeah, we need to do that, and then that was about it. Now they're aggressively going after it. I see a lot of 2012 and 2014. Now, a lot of it is the application vendors that they're on have just recently supported 16, if at all. Um, we've got a few that actually haven't even supported 14 yet, let alone 16. It's really holding them back. But I see a lot of these, but at least the momentum is there to try to get off of there as fast as they can now, especially from a support standpoint. So it's on its way out, but it's just like anything. It's got a half-life rather than just disappearing.
Yeah, I know that, 2019 is knocking on our doors. So if you haven't upgraded, it's like it's just rolling over you if you haven't upgraded. I know that about a year and a half ago, I had all the way down to 2000 in my environment, and I actually, yeah, I was like, ugh, what do I open up to see the database? You gotta have to almost query things on Google and say, what do I do now? Yeah, because I'd forgotten, and stuff. So, but we are, knock on wood, our lowest level now is in our shop is 2016,
Oh, that's
which,
great.
yeah, and we're already eyeing 2019 when it comes out. So
Cool. We've got a couple of shops that we're looking at 19, largely because they've got some very serious temp-DB contention, and some of the announcements that came out at the past summit were just incredible for that. So we've got one. As soon as we can get more of a closer CTP, we're going to have them start playing with it, and hopefully we're going to be able to get them on even RTM, just because of just how severe their temp-DB problems are.
yeah, and there was some things there. I don't know if you saw it, but some things there on functions that, functions, we always have known has had horrible plans, right? They would tell you that
Yeah.
I'm gonna return one row, and here you get 100,000 back or whatever. You shouldn't, but but we know how people do that, and we've got a product actually in our shop that we will actually probably benefit greatly on that, because it's got so many functions in it. This developer thought it was trying to make the application object-oriented program by doing a lot of functions.
Oof.
Just horrible. It's a really bad. Yeah, it's not good. It's not good. So we did get a question here from Chris. Um, do you prefer? Oh, this is going to be good. Do you prefer VMware to Hyper-V or Hyper-V for SQL Server, especially for AGs?
Ooh, that's a good question. My official answer is I don't honestly have a preference anymore. I used to, but the latest versions of Hyper-V are really solid. They caught up. The latest version of VMware, rock solid as well. So when it comes to just raw hypervisor, I honestly don't have a preference. They both do just work. Now, where I have differences with the different platforms is with the management side. VMware has got vCenter, Hyper-V. You can either do it standalone, or you can use something like System Center Virtual Machine Manager. Where I challenge Microsoft on this one is that the System Center stack still continues to feel rather disjointed, and a lot of the things that VMware does in a single interface that are arguably pretty easy to do, it's not the easiest to do inside System Center. So, as far as performance, as far as scalability, especially for AGs, I'm okay with either one. They both work great. When it comes to manage it, there are a lot of things that you need to do for both of them, to be honest. But with the Microsoft management stack for this, it is a little more time consuming. I don't want to say difficult, but it is a little more time consuming. And a lot of things that you can point and click your way through VMware, you do have to either have the right level of permissions to do this inside System Center or directly to the host, or have a pretty substantial amount of PowerShell in there to help you go automate and streamline a lot of these tasks. So to me, I'm okay with both. If you're going to use Hyper-V, it does take a little more work to get a lot of these scripts set up initially, but once you've got them done, everything's fine. So I hope that answered the question there.
All right. Yeah, we again, we were talking right before we got on. We probably 8 months ago, when we changed servers and went up to 2016, we installed a failover cluster instance, and And just next week, we're putting in that third node that's going to be an AG to the failover cluster instance. So we really complicated it, right? We decided to do a failover cluster instance to an AG instead of having 3 AGs because you didn't want to triple the disk space. And I'm like going, yeah, you're making things a lot more complex than what they probably should be. But
it's still a reasonable architecture though, so I'm okay with it.
yeah, it does. And it's just to get to the third node, just a manual failover is all. You can't have it automated, so which is okay.
Yeah.
So, but it works really well. I love having the failover cluster in there, and we are too. To let you know, David, we're all VMware, so that's where we are. So Chris, that's what we've done on top of VMware. We don't the only bare metal we have is the host. So go ahead, guys. Get any other questions in that you might have. See where we're going here and stuff. So David, where are you seeing DevOps in the range of uh, VMware or anything like that? Or are they doing anything to help with the deployment of code, or are we still kind of more Redgate and Visual Studio?
Well, it all depends on your perspective, and I hate that answer, but the VMware and Hyper-V layers, so we'll just say virtualization in general, they're doing a lot to allow containers to run easier on their platforms. When it comes to the DevOps side, they're increasing their automation. They're making it easier to deploy VMs, and some of these things, there's a VMware container service. Hyper-V I think has got some equivalencies there. It's one of those where you still have to kind of wire the pieces together. It's certainly not turnkey at this point, but it's a whole lot easier than it was, and it's a lot easier to get support for a lot of these different configurations that you want in order to enable streamlining these things to really encourage DevOps in your organization. The challenges with it are basically separating the layers. The whole DevOps term really is more automation, it's more streamlining, and there's a lot of containers in there to make life a little bit easier. The virtualization layers provide the underlying platforms for the containers to run on. So you still need the virtualization layer. You've just got to now wire them together. So I see it, as these things become more streamlined, more specialized, it's definitely helping. Still not perfect, but it's definitely coming a long way quickly.
Okay. We have another question that popped in from Jeff.
Cool.
What are the biggest configuration mistakes you see made for configuring SQL Server instances on VM?
Ooh, man, I could answer that one and take the rest of the day. The biggest configuration mistakes, there are many that are common, but the biggest ones are going to be twofold. One, actually three. The first one is misaligning the virtual machine CPUs with the physical machine CPUs. The second is going to be the way that the amount of activity going on the hypervisor, and people assuming that you can just throw tons of activity on it and not have any performance problems. And the third is going to be the way storage is presented. Let me take a note here so I get these in the right order. So vNUMA, CPU, scheduling, and then disk. Okay. Long story short, virtual machine NUMA is a fascinating topic, and it's one that a lot of people don't clearly understand in practice. Essentially, you've got a physical motherboard with sockets for CPUs on it. Each socket also has memory associated to it. Now, the CPU in one socket can access the memory in another socket, but it's called a remote NUMA node lookup. And what happens there is that it's actually slower. It's about 2.3 times slower than a local memory lookup or accessing the RAM on its own socket. The reason for why this is so important is that with the amount of RAM that SQL Server churns through, if I can keep these workloads localized to the local socket, everything gets a little bit quicker. In some cases, a lot quicker. So now I need to build a virtual machine to match my physical CPU topology. So when I say a 1x8 VM, I'm going to assume this is one virtual socket by 8 virtual core VM. So just round numbers. Let's say I've got two 10-core physical machine CPUs. Now, hyperthreading, just ignore it for now. If I build a VM with 8 CPU cores, I want that 8 to fit comfortably inside one socket on the physical machine. Same thing with the RAM. Let's say each NUMA node has 128 gigs of RAM on the physical machine, or 200 is 2 sockets, so 256 gigs of RAM total. Yeah, there's a little bit of overhead for running a VM, running the hypervisor in the background. So let's just say I have 120 gigs of usable RAM. So if my VM is 10 cores or less and 120 gigs of RAM or less, it's going to fit within one NUMA node. And all that memory lookup is going to be local. And you don't have to worry about the churn, basically, of managing what is where from a virtual machine perspective and a guest perspective and a SQL Server perspective. So if the VM fits there, it's probably going to go faster. Now, if the VM does not fit within one physical NUMA node from a CPU or memory perspective, then what you need to do is essentially split the VM down the middle. So in that case, 10-core physical chips, let's say I want a 16-core VM. So you would provision the VM for a 2 virtual socket, 8 virtual core machine. And that way, now my VM is going to be split evenly. The hypervisor will hopefully balance it properly. And as long as the workload itself knows how to manage NUMA, you just got a performance gain that way, because the workload will try to keep a single task on one NUMA node, and it'll bounce back and forth as needed, and everything will be okay. Where I see people getting this wrong is that they build the VM incorrectly, so it spans the NUMA nodes at the physical machine layer, but that spanning is not presented all the way through into the operating system of the guest. And you end up with remote memory lookups, you end up with NUMA mismanagement, and the whole thing slows down, and it's very, very quiet. You just don't see it inside the virtual machine. But that gets into the scheduling. Where I see most people getting stuff wrong is that they over-allocate the virtual machine resources. A lot of times, let's say, I'll see we did one a while back, 2,700 virtual machines, all for SQL Server, all production, a big environment. And their reference architecture was that every VM got 16 virtual CPUs and 64 gigs of RAM. Sounds kind of crazy, but being a big environment, they had a lot of just generic standards that they tried to keep things in place for easy management. Well, in a virtual machine, every single thing that goes through the hypervisor has to be scheduled to run on a resource in the scheduling queue before it actually gets executed. The bigger the VM, the more it actually has to go manage and juggle inside these scheduling queues. So, if there's a lot of competition in there, these things can slow down. So essentially, this is your virtual CPU core to physical CPU core count. But you also got to worry about variability and usage in there. So if all these things are pretty idle, probably not a huge deal. But if a lot of these things are really active, then the time spent in the queue starts to really stack up. If the time spent in the queue starts to stack up a lot, this is more silent degradation in performance inside your virtual machine. Now, Hyper-V's got a counter called CPU wait time per dispatch. It actually tells you the amount of nanoseconds spent in that polling interval in the scheduling queue. So you can actually calculate the actual performance hit there. On VMware, this is called CPU ready time. So what you can do is you can actually be objective and say, my CPU overcommit ratio is this, which results in this kind of performance penalty. If that performance penalty is very low, then that's acceptable. And maybe I can pile a few more VMs on the same physical machine and not hurt anything. But I have seen this percentage performance hit approach 90% before. It's a significant problem if these things are done wrong. And it could just be that the VM is just oversized and it's just taking forever. It could be that the background workload is crushing it, or it could be that the virtual machine NUMA configuration is misaligned, causing things to slow down there. So in that environment, that 2700 VM environment, standards, 16 cores, 64 gigs of RAM. We went and we looked and we right-sized everything, and we found that out of the 2700, 2500 of them would fit comfortably on 2 CPUs and 16 gigs of RAM. We told them that if you did this across your entire production farm, you'd decrease the VM footprint enough that you could actually consolidate the virtual machines and turn off half of the physical machine equipment. And the only thing that would happen is it would get quicker. And they didn't believe us, so we did it to a dev environment, and it worked. And then they went this into production and actually turned off half of their equipment. It was massive. So, and the only thing that happened to performance actually got a little bit better. Sounds crazy, but sometimes less is more. And then the last thing there is storage. So you've got SAN, LUNs, you've got storage, and then you've got virtual disks that attach to the virtual machine, and then you mount these just like normal storage. A lot of times, if I've got really heavy I/O requirements, so big aggressive SQL servers, the default is to daisy chain all of these disks onto a single storage controller inside the virtual machine. Well, the Windows layer and the hypervisor layer both have queues based on this disk controller. You get up to 4 of these SCSI controllers per virtual machine. Most of the time, it's not what's the word? It's really not evident from the front end that you can go move these things around and basically add more controllers, add more queues, and scale out your workload. But if you're on all flash, you can do this and get a pretty significant performance boost to disk when these things are all really active. If you're on flash hybrid, you can still get a pretty substantial gain. If you're on spindle, you can get a gain, and it may be measurable, but rarely is it massively, different. So I see folks doing that where they've kind of artificially created a bottleneck. And if you've never seen this before, the biggest thing to watch out for is that from a hypervisor perspective, you see really high disk latency inside the virtual machine. You see SQL Server throwing long I/O alerts, things like that. But when you talk to the storage admin, they come back to you and they say, well, everything's fine. Those numbers are lying to you. Go to bed. Well, they're not lying to you. They're truthful from its point of view. But there's a lot of stuff in between the operating system and SQL Server and the storage itself. There's the hypervisor scheduling queue from the VM. There's a scheduling queue at the hypervisor to get to the LUN. There's any switching that you've got, and then there's time spent stuck in the controller of the storage. So if you see these kind of discrepancies, take the numbers that you've got and go back to them and say, hey, there's a lot more going on here. These numbers don't jive, and these numbers are not to be discounted. It's individual data points there that need to be investigated. So you put all this stuff together, and I claim that even for machines that need, hundreds of thousands of IOPS of storage demand, you can come within 1% to 2% of bare metal performance. So long-winded answer there. Hopefully that answered that for you.
Well, that was great, David, because I was going to ask you a question. I've got a friend that has a computer, and he was asking me, on VM, and he was like, over provisioning, they were having some performance problems. They were over provisioning their CPU. He was asking me, should I over provision the CPU? And I'm like going, with a SQL server, I would be very hesitant to do that. So.
Well, depends on the usage. If it's a normal SQL server, it's not running at 100% all the time. And essentially, we've got pretty good luck actually doing that, but you got to be careful. A lot of times we can do this successfully. We can say, we can do, we've even done up to 3-to-1 vCPU to physical CPU core in production and been pretty successful with it. But if the SQL server is running at, say, 100%, you're not over provisioning that one because there's nothing left. Most of the time, we're not running that hot. So it's the ready time, the wait time per dispatch, the storage latency. That's the sort of thing where if you really pay attention there, you can do it, but you got to be careful. So if you want to be conservative, don't do it. Don't do it until you know how your workload is going to level out there. But once you get it on there, once you really get some of these numbers, really evaluate how it's running, then carefully start to add load on there.
So if your CPU, say you had 8 CPUs out there and is sustaining about 20%, but bursting to about 60, should we take it down to 6 CPU or 4 CPU? It's kind of like I would say, let's bring it down and see if we can get the CPU usage. Where do you like that throttle to be? Where do you like to see the SQL Server running at about sustained CPU?
Well, first of all, I got to break that down into time periods. That 60% burst that you mentioned, is that during a business critical time period where that task is time sensitive? Or is that more like index maintenance at the middle of the night where it's running in 30 minutes, but you got 4 hours to let it finish and everything's quiet? You're not going to impact anything if things take longer. If you can decide where are things during the time periods that matter to the business, if you can solve that, then you can really start to scale this. So let's just say that's 60%. Let's just say that's one time a week during an integrity check. And the rest of the week during, let's say, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday to Friday, we don't break 30%. At that point, at 8 CPUs, I would say you could probably cut half the cores because at cutting half the cores, you're probably going to be in the 60-65% range. And that's right near the high end of where I would like to see that. It's not enough to where you could start really seeing a lot of CPU scheduling contention, but it's hot enough to where you're going to get really good utilization of that platform. Part of this you can measure with the CPU processor queue length perf mon counter. There's a lot of things you can see inside the SQL Server engine itself, a lot of weights, weight types, CX packet weights, SOS scheduler yield, things like that that can really confirm what the Windows layer is actually showing you. But you do have to put all this stuff together in order to be a good judge of that.
Okay, cool. Ladies and gentlemen, again, this is your opportunity. You've got the specialists of SQL Server and VMware here giving us the answers we need.
Hyper-V, Zen, Red Hat, Oracle VM.
Yeah,
I'm trying not to label just VMware anymore.
You're spreading out, huh?
Oh yeah, dude, I've always worked on a lot of different hypervisors. I used to have a job where I couldn't talk about Hyper-V very much, but we do a lot of work with Hyper-V. We do a lot of work with Nutanix Acropolis. It's basically a KVM variant. There's a lot of good hypervisors out there, and they're all solid in their own way. Yeah, like I said, we're equal opportunity discriminators of technology. We'll smash any of it.
Right, we'll break whatever we can break, right? So
exactly.
Yeah. All right. So, have you seen any issues with performance issues? I'm gonna ask you the question, that I can answer it for you if you don't. But with adding encryption on top of this thing, what's it doing? Doing to you? Anything?
It depends on the layer of encryption. If you're talking TDE, there is a marked rise in CPU consumption as a result of that. If you've got enough headroom in CPUs, you shouldn't really see as a dramatic performance hit. If you're doing VM level encryption, as long as the hardware that you've got has got enough headroom, you really shouldn't see much. You'll probably see a smidge. If you're doing storage-based encryption, if the disks are self-encrypting, you shouldn't see anything. If it's an added encryption layer on top of it, you're going to feel it. So what's your experience been like with that?
Yeah, it's what we've noticed. We do cell level encryption, and actually right now on that particular, and that's a 2005 product, so we haven't moved over to always encrypted yet for that. And what we've noticed is our 3 most resource intensive queries happen to be encryption. Encrypting and decrypting it. We actually ran into, David, and then maybe this is good to announce for the group. I didn't even tell you this, but when I was telling you about the story of us bringing a database out of the cloud onto on-prem, where we've got encryption in other databases, and it was like we went from 8 CPUs to 28 CPUs. Well, did you realize that there's what I call 2 versions of Enterprise Edition software of SQL Server?
Core and normal.
Yeah, core and normal.
Yep.
And that, core, of course, is unlimited CPU. And, of course, the normal is, you're capped at 20 CPUs. Well, we were at not core. We were at the other one, and we were capped at 20. and we put it up to 28, our encryption process just about ground the encrypted database to a halt because we were having waits because of course calling Microsoft, they were doing all the encryption is not really handled in SQL Server, it's handled within Windows, and it was trying to put that out there on a VMware machine, and our performance just sucked until he brought the CPUs back down to 20. And of course, we fixed the license issue. The core got us back to unlimited. Then he brought it back up. So
yeah, that kind of stuff is tough. And it's not just this. Whenever we see CPUs out of balance like that, it causes a lot of issues. Even things where, let's say 10 gig networking, 10 gig networking, if you've got a 10 gig NIC that is maxed out, just 7, 8, 900 megs a second transferring data, what you'll find is that one of the cores on the machine is probably running close to 100%. As a result, if SQL Server is trying to schedule something on that core, you got a problem. It's going to slow the whole thing down. A lot of times we'll either, on workloads like that, we'll actually affinitize a core per socket just for background tasks from the operating system, or maybe we'll actually use CPU affinity there to dedicate certain cores to certain things. The flip side of that is with that particular scenario, you can actually enable receive side scaling on Windows, and it'll actually parallelize the network traffic. But anytime you see issues like that, you got to react and respond to it, but you got to be watching the data in order to see it. That's the hard part.
yeah, somewhere I missed that there was a difference between the installation of enterprise software. So I was sleeping during that or something because it's like it really caused us problems for a few
Yeah,
days.
I've
So
actually got a screenshot that I keep of this just to warn people about, because it is a pretty significant issue.
yeah, it definitely is. So just be aware, folks. If you go out there and check your license, and if it says core, then you're unlimited. If you're on enterprise, if it just says enterprise, you're limited to 20 CPUs. Don't go over because you'll cause yourself all kinds of trouble. Well, Peter brought in another question. What are your thoughts on JBOD flash or spinning Rust storage for SQL Server in both physical or virtualized environments?
Oh, JBOD. So the challenge there is in the JBOD arrays that you're referring to, do you have redundancy built into it? Some form of RAID. If it's a traditional JBOD array, you don't. So what that means is, let's say I've got 8 disks in a JBOD. If any one of them die, you lost everything. I'm really nervous about that. If you've got the potential to actually make it some kind of RAID where there's resiliency against a disk failure in there, I'm better with that. The local attached storage is still going to be your cheapest option for speed. It's not the most resilient because you've got a single point of failure in there, and that's the biggest challenge that I've got with it. If you're running availability groups, I'm a lot better about it because then you've got redundancy in the platform that it's on, whereas SANs are usually really hardened. It's not to say they don't fail, but the odds that they're going to fail are a lot less than if you have local attached storage. But SANs are expensive compared to local disks. So it all depends on your use case there. But how do I feel about it? I personally would want to see a SAN just because of the hardening baked into it. But if you're just looking for inexpensive, reliable speed, as long as you've got RAID in that storage array, you should be fine, and it's going to be quick, or should be quick anyway.
Cool. Angie brought up another point on the limited licensing. She also said that we can see it in our SQL Server error log at the beginning when it starts up that it's limited to 20 cores. But just check it out, folks. If you haven't ever looked at it and you are running enterprise, it only affects that. It does not affect standard or any other versions you have. So
Yeah.
So that was fun. Gotcha. Anybody else having questions? If not, we might just give everybody back some time here, David, unless there's something else you want to bring up.
No, I think that's it. What I'll say is that for anybody watching this after the fact, if you can think of anything, even if it's, watching this on a recording, months later, don't hesitate to reach out to both of us. We're geeks. We like this stuff. We're happy to answer questions. I can speak for me and say it might take me a couple days to get back to you because it's always a little busy. We run our own business, but we'll definitely get back to you. We want to help out with this stuff, and there's, I don't want to sound like I'm marketing there. We're genuinely wanting to help. So let us know if you have any questions down the road.
Yeah, and there's always, if you can't reach us here, you can catch us on Twitter or also on Twitter at Pound SQL Help. People are out there always trying to assist one another. Great community for trying to help each other. So can't say enough about that. Definitely helped my career. I'm sure it's helped
Oh
yours
yeah.
too, David. So.
Yes, it has. If it wasn't for the SQL Server community, I would have not have gone independent as a consultant. Just I'll flat out say that. This is the best technical community I've ever been a part of. It's the most giving, it's the most friendly and open. And, it's one of those, if you can't make it to past Summit, go to a local SQL Saturday, go to a local user group, get involved with the community because you're going to learn whether you like it or not. It's going to help your career, and who knows, maybe even the networking there can help you get a better job down the road. No matter what, everybody wins. So go, and if you already are going, think about speaking. Put together a 5-minute talk, 10-minute talk. Any of the coordinators out there will be happy to take your sessions and get you in front of folks. And if you have a topic that you like, even if it's been presented 100 times or if there's 1,000 blog posts on it, do it again. Put your own twist on it. People like me, I love to see this. I love to help new speakers get involved. And the best way to learn a topic is to pick one and get up in front of your peers.
Yeah, and don't be afraid, just like I did, to basically say, I didn't do it right. I installed Enterprise wrong. I put it to 20 cores because I know that when I was at SQL Saturday Charlotte, I actually asked that question to several people, and I was surprised, even at the speaker level, how many people did not know that, was not aware of that. So it's you know, great speaking. You can definitely get out there and learn a lot, share what you've gone through, because what you've gone through may not be what someone else has gone through. So definitely information there. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to close it early today. And thanks again, David. I always appreciate and love talking to you and stuff and seeing you whenever I can, whenever we run into each other. We will have this recording out there on YouTube probably by this weekend, maybe a little bit sooner if I can. And other than that, we'll see you next month. Thanks.
Perfect. Yep. Thanks everybody for coming. And again, looking forward to doing more of these in the future.
Okay. Talk to you later.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.